The morning the chainsaws started, Mark Ellison thought the wind had changed. At first, the buzz was distant, swallowed by fog rolling down the slope behind his cedar-sided home on Willow Ridge. But when he opened his kitchen door and smelled gasoline and sap, he knew something was wrong. Where there should have been the solid green hush of 50-year-old pines, there were orange vests, white trucks, and men with saws cutting through the quiet like it owed them money. The HOA banner flapped on one of the trucks. Silverview Estates, maintaining our community standards. Mark's stomach dropped. He'd planted those trees with his father when he was 9. Back then, this whole hillside had been open pasture, the soil loose and slick after rain. The pines weren't decoration, they were anchors, roots stitching the slope to the bedrock. Without them, half the hill would slide into the valley during the next heavy storm. He sprinted down the deck steps, boots crunching gravel. "Hey, stop! You're on private property!" The nearest worker killed his saw but didn't look nervous, just annoyed. "HOA order," he said, pointing to a clipboard. "President signed off this morning. Visual obstruction complaint, section 4.3, preservation of shared views. You'll have to take it up with the board." Mark's pulse hammered. "Those trees are the hill. You cut them." "This place floods." The man shrugged and started the saw again. By the time Mark reached the HOA office, a converted townhouse perched smugly at the ridge's highest point, 3 trees were already down. The secretary at the desk barely looked up. "Mr. Ellison, good morning. If this is about the landscaping project, Mrs. Pemberton is expecting you." Of course she was. Evelyn Pemberton, HOA president, 70 going on eternal, pearl necklace tight as a choke chain. Her idea of community harmony was beige paint and uniform mailboxes. She met him in the conference room surrounded by framed aerial photos of the neighborhood. The view, she said, made property values soar. Mark slammed the notice onto the table. "You didn't even give me warning." Evelyn smiled, a weapon disguised as courtesy. "We posted notices on the bulletin last week. Behind the clubhouse bar doesn't count as notice. It does under Bylaw 5.2. She folded her hands. "Mark, everyone appreciates your commitment to natural beauty, but the committee received multiple complaints from Phase 2 residents. Your trees block the lake view. That impacts appraisal averages. We can't have that. They also block landslides," he shot back. Evelyn's eyes narrowed just slightly, like shutters closing before a storm. "Our soil studies show minimal risk." Mark leaned forward. "Whose study?" "You did one?" Silence. Then, the developer's original survey from 2005. That survey was 20 years old, before the new irrigation lines, before the hill was carved into terraces and topped with patio decks. He felt heat crawl up his neck. "Call them off, now!" Evelyn sighed as if he were a child throwing a tantrum. "I'm afraid the removal's already budgeted." "It's done?" Mark walked out before he said something unprintable. By noon, the hill behind his house looked like a battlefield. Stumps bleeding resin, earth torn open. A pair of hawks circled overhead, confused, calling for branches that were gone. And at the base of the hill, muddy runoff had already begun to trickle toward his workshop. That night, rain came early. Heavy, impatient rain that hammered the roof and turned the hillside into soup. Mark stood on his porch with a flashlight watching rivulets carve channels down the slope. Each streak of brown water was a warning. He grabbed sandbags from the garage, built a quick wall around the lower door, and prayed the soil would hold until morning. At dawn, it didn't. Half the slope had slumped forward, swallowing 2 newly poured patios from the homes below. One SUV sat nose down in a pit of red clay. Neighbors were already gathering, clutching phones, filming. Someone screamed, "The hill's collapsing!" Evelyn arrived 30 minutes later, wrapped in a plastic raincoat, umbrella snapping in the wind. "What happened here?" she demanded. Mark turned, soaked, covered in mud up to his knees. "What happened?" "You happened. You took the roots out of the hill." She started to speak, then saw the gash of mud that had buried a section of the HOA's brand new drainage pipe. The look on her face was the first real crack in her porcelain calm. "Get maintenance on this immediately." She barked at her phone, but the damage was done. Water was still flowing, carving deeper, angrier channels. Mark's workshop door buckled under the pressure. When the rain finally stopped, the hill was unrecognizable. Half-bare clay, half-collapsed terraces. Insurance adjusters arrived, shaking their heads. Tree removal without geotechnical clearance? That's a negligence claim waiting to happen. Mark filed photos, timestamps, copies of every email he'd ever exchanged with the HOA. He wasn't a lawyer, but he knew documentation was armor. And while the HOA scrambled to blame unforeseen weather, he was already drafting something else. A request for public records from the county engineering office. 2 weeks later, the county sent him scanned blueprints of the development's original drainage plan. Line C14, stormwater diversion, ran directly beneath the pines that had been removed. Those roots weren't just stabilizers. They wrapped the pipe that kept runoff from overwhelming the valley basin. He traced the blueprint with his finger, realizing the cruel irony. Those trees were the only thing holding the HOA's own infrastructure together. He called the engineer listed on the file, a retired man named Ben Holder. "Yeah, I remember Silverview," Ben said. "We told the developer those slopes needed reinforcement every 20 years. Did the HOA ever renew the inspection permit?" "No," Mark said. Ben laughed softly like someone hearing an old joke end badly. "Then they're standing on borrowed dirt." That line stuck with him. Mark spent nights rebuilding his workshop and days photographing new cracks spreading through the hillside. Each picture went into a folder titled Evidence. Meanwhile, the HOA sent him a violation notice for unsightly erosion barriers. He taped it to his fridge like a trophy. 3 weeks later, an HOA landscaper knocked on his door, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Ellison, I've been instructed to install new retaining walls on behalf of the association." Mark eyed the blueprints. The walls were planned on his parcel line. "No work on my land without written permission," he said, voice steady. The landscaper hesitated. "Ma'am said it's communal slope." "It's not. And if your crew crosses that marker, I'll call the sheriff." That afternoon, he did something Evelyn Pemberton would never expect. He invited the local news. The segment aired under the headline, "Homeowner Warns HOA Ignored Safety Warnings." Footage showed cracked patios, sliding soil, and stumps weeping sap. By nightfall, the HOA's Facebook group was on fire, half defending the board, half demanding Evelyn's resignation. But the storm, Mark knew, hadn't even started. Because buried in those county documents was one more page, something no one else had noticed. A liability clause transferring slope maintenance responsibility to whoever ordered landscape alteration, meaning the HOA now legally owned every ounce of that crumbling hill and every dollar it would take to fix it. Mark sat at his desk under the hum of a single lamp, rain tapping the window again, and whispered to himself, "You wanted a better view, Evelyn? Let's make sure you see everything coming." 3 days after the broadcast, the HOA office looked less like a board headquarters and more like a bunker. Plastic tubs stacked in hallways, a printer whirring nonstop. The words "pending claims" scrawled across boxes in red marker. And in the middle of it all, President Evelyn Pemberton pacing like a general watching her empire sink into the mud. She was on her third conference call before sunrise, voice brittle but rehearsed. "No, the slope issue predates our maintenance." "The trees were diseased," she insisted. Her vice president, a meek dentist named Arlo Frost, looked at his shoes. He'd seen the stumps, fresh, healthy rings bright as butter. By noon, half the neighborhood had driven past Mark's house just to stare. The slope now sagged like a tired spine. The retaining wall behind Unit 32 bulged outward, hairline cracks like veins spreading through the concrete. Every hour Mark heard new thuds, chunks of soil sliding down, slow but steady. He'd stopped being angry. Now he was methodical. Each sound meant evidence. Each movement of dirt meant proof. He set up 2 motion capture cameras facing the hillside, their LEDs blinking like patient eyes in the rain. That night, he opened his laptop and began what he called the root file, a digital record, photo sets, time-stamped, a drone footage from a friend at the local fire department, copy of the county liability clause circled in red, and a folder labeled Pemberton Emails, obtained legally, because he'd discovered something delicious. HOA email accounts were public under the state's open records law, provided a request cited public interest. He typed until 3 a.m., cross-referencing invoices, board meeting minutes, and permit numbers. What emerged was a picture Evelyn would have burned the world to hide. The HOA had paid a private contractor to remove trees on communal property, then billed the cost directly to residents. That same contractor's business address matched the property of Evelyn's nephew, Trent Pemberton Landscaping, LLC, a company created 6 weeks earlier. The next morning, Mark printed everything, sealed it in a manila envelope, and slid it under the door of the local environmental inspector. On the outside, he wrote 3 words, "Check the slope." The inspection came quietly but hit like thunder. 2 white county trucks arrived unannounced at 8:45 a.m. Men in safety vests unloaded tripods and soil augers. Evelyn burst from her door in slippers, waving her coffee mug like a flag. "This is private property." The lead inspector, a woman named Carmen Lopez, didn't flinch. "Ma'am, you filed a modification permit. That gives us access for verification." Mark watched from his porch as they drilled core samples, measured subsidence, and took photos of cracked retaining walls. When Carmen's phone buzzed with a notification, she showed her partner, eyes widening. The county hydrology office had just upgraded the risk level: imminent slope failure. By evening, evacuation orders were issued for 4 downhill homes. News vans arrived again, their satellite dishes like silver mushrooms sprouting after rain. Evelyn tried to give a statement. Reporters ignored her. They wanted the man whose trees were gone and whose warnings came true. Mark hated the attention. He only wanted accountability. He gave one calm quote: "Nature doesn't follow bylaws. It follows gravity." The line made the evening headlines. 2 nights later, a black SUV idled outside Mark's gate. The driver's window rolled down. Arlo Frost leaned out, face pale. "Mark, for God's sake, Evelyn's blaming you." "Says you sabotaged the slope." Mark laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I'd need a bulldozer to match what her nephew did," Arlo swallowed. "They're meeting tomorrow. Executive session. She wants to sue you personally." "Good," Mark said. "Let her." He spent that night preparing. Every invoice, every drone clip, every clause. He even printed a topographic overlay showing the slope's original tree density versus current erosion zones. In red ink, he wrote across the bottom, "Cut 31 trees. Lost 20 feet of ground. Value, $1.4 million in damages." The next day's board meeting overflowed. Residents packed folding chairs. The air smelled of wet coats and fear. Evelyn sat at the head table beneath a banner reading, "Silverview Estates, upholding our standard of excellence." "Mr. Ellison," she began, "you stand accused of property negligence leading to community damages." Mark placed a small speaker on the table and pressed play. The voice that filled the room belonged to Trent Pemberton. "Yeah, Aunt Ev, we cleared 30-plus trees. Easy money. No permits, no checks. You sure this is fine?" Her recorded reply was crisp as glass. "Don't worry. I'll file the paperwork later. The board won't know." The silence that followed could have swallowed the hill whole. Then the shouting began. Neighbors, board members, even Arlo yelling over one another. Evelyn slammed her gavel until the handle snapped, but Mark wasn't finished. He handed a flash drive to Carmen Lopez, who had come as a county observer. Every document, every permit, every photo. "You'll find the contractor's falsified invoices and the duplicate payments from HOA reserves." Carmen nodded. "We already suspected fraud." "Thank you for confirming it." Evelyn's complexion drained to chalk. "This is defamation!" she hissed. Carmen's badge gleamed in the fluorescent light. "Ma'am, it's evidence." By week's end, the county filed a stop work order on all HOA construction. The local paper ran the headline, "Tree Scandal Triggers Landslide. HOA under investigation for fraud and negligence." Evelyn vanished from public view. But Mark's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, lawyers, even residents begging him to attend an emergency town hall. He refused until he received one voicemail that changed everything. "Mr. Ellison, this is Carmen Lopez. You need to see something at the site, today." He arrived to find the hill fenced off with yellow tape. Carmen pointed to a fresh fissure running parallel to his back deck, wide enough to swallow a hand. "Groundwater's moving," she said. "If this opens more, the entire ridge could slide. We need the HOA's maintenance funds to stabilize it, immediately." Mark frowned. "They froze their accounts after the audit. Then no one's paying for reinforcement. And rain's due Friday." He looked at the horizon, clouds stacking like bruises. "Then we build our own wall." He called Rafe, the welder from the Broken Antler story. Yes, the same Rafe who loved a good fight against bureaucracy. Within 24 hours, they'd welded rebar cages and filled them with stone, creating makeshift gabion barriers. Neighbors helped. Even those who'd once voted to remove the trees brought shovels and coffee. Someone spray-painted a sign on the fence. "Roots Remember." By Friday night, the rain returned, harder than ever. But this time, the hill held. Barely. Saturday morning, Evelyn finally resurfaced, accompanied by a lawyer and 2 sheriff's deputies. She served Mark with a cease and desist for unauthorized construction on HOA property. Mark smiled, rain dripping from his hat brim. "Then you admit it's yours. Perfect. Carmen?" The inspector stepped forward with a clipboard. "By your own statement, you're assuming liability for slope maintenance." "The county accepts." Evelyn froze. her lawyer whispered urgently, but it was too late. In one sentence, she'd signed the HOA into millions in potential restitution. Mark turned away as cameras clicked behind him. For the first time in months, he felt lighter, not vindicated, but closer to balance. The hill was scarred, yes. But so was everyone who had ignored the warning that roots matter, and he wasn't done yet. Because deep in those HOA bank records, he'd seen another line item that made his pulse quicken. Phase 3 expansion. Projected Lakeview Estates, 2025. They weren't stopping. They were growing. He looked back at the wounded hillside and muttered, "Let's see how they grow without soil." By Monday morning, the story had spread far beyond Silverview Estates. Local radio hosts joked that their HOA had done more landscaping than the Corps of Engineers. Online forums buzzed with memes of chainsaws and sliding houses captioned, "Views worth dying for." But to Mark, it wasn't funny anymore. The storm had passed, yet the earth under his porch still trembled like a warning whispering up from the roots that no longer existed. He could smell clay in the air, that rich metallic scent that told you the ground was bleeding. At 6:12 a.m., a low rumble cracked through the valley. Mark stepped outside just in time to watch a 10-foot section of retaining wall crumble like wet paper. Chunks of concrete tumbled downhill into the backyard of Unit 32. No one was hurt, but the slope had shifted again, closer this time. He filmed everything. Drone hovering above, timestamp visible. Within the hour, county engineers arrived. They marked the ground in orange paint and whispered to one another with grave faces. Carmen Lopez, the inspector, approached quietly. "It's moving faster than we expected," she said. "If this keeps up, half these homes will be red tagged within a week." Mark folded his arms. "And the HOA? They're paralyzed. Their funds are frozen. Their president's under investigation. Legally, no one's maintaining the hill." He looked toward the houses lined neatly along the ridge, people he'd lived beside for years, some friends, some enemies, all staring down the same disaster. "Then maybe it's time the community learned who really owns this slope," he said. That night, Mark uploaded a new video titled "The Hill That Remembers." It wasn't dramatic. No music, no effects, just footage of the broken wall, the sliding soil, and his calm narration. "They said my trees blocked their view. Turns out those roots were the only thing holding their view in place. Gravity doesn't care about board votes. Nature doesn't read bylaws. And if you don't respect the ground you stand on, one day it moves out from under you." The video hit 2 million views in a week. Emails poured in from across the country. Geologists, lawyers, even retired HOA members offering him expert statements. But the most important message came from Carmen Lopez. "County's filing an injunction tomorrow. You might want to be there." The courthouse smelled of dust and fear. Evelyn Pemberton sat at the defense table, her pearl necklace tight around her throat. Next to her, her nephew Trent scrolled nervously through his phone. Their lawyer whispered frantically as Judge Morales entered the room. Mark sat opposite them, calm, a small folder of documents in front of him. Carmen sat behind him as a witness. The judge's voice cut through the murmurs. "Case 23-1784, Ellison v. Silverview Estates Homeowners Association. Motion for emergency injunction and restitution." Evelyn's lawyer rose first. "Your Honor, my client's actions were within HOA authority to maintain visual uniformity and property value." The judge raised a hand. "Counselor, I've seen the footage. I've read the environmental report. Trees worth 40 years of root structure were removed without permit, without assessment, and without right." He turned to Mark. "Mr. Ellison, you've provided quite a record here. Before we proceed, can you confirm your evidence is authentic?" Mark stood, voice even. "Yes, Your Honor, all timestamps verified. Including this," he handed a flash drive to the bailiff. The screen flickered to life. Drone footage rolled. Trent's workers laughing as they hauled logs away, Evelyn pointing with a clipboard. Then the next clip, a week later, showed the slope beginning to sag, the same area now fenced off with yellow tape. The courtroom was silent, except for the hum of the projector. Mark's narration over the footage echoed softly. "When you cut the roots that hold a hill, you don't just move dirt. You move history." The judge leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Ms. Pemberton, did you authorize this work?" Evelyn hesitated, mouth opening, closing. We discussed improvements." The board voted. Arlo Frost, sitting behind her, suddenly stood. "Your Honor, the board never approved any tree removal. She ordered it herself." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Evelyn turned on him, face red. "You coward!" The judge banged his gavel. "Enough." When the verdict came, it was surgical. The court declared the HOA liable for environmental negligence, fraud, and unauthorized use of community funds. Evelyn and Trent were ordered to pay $2.8 million in restitution to affected homeowners. The HOA was placed under temporary receivership, meaning county supervision until new elections could be held. But the real moment wasn't the money. It came when the judge said, "Mr. Ellison, the county recognizes your property as a stabilizing zone. You are hereby granted full maintenance rights and restoration authority over the slope." In plain terms, the hill was his again. Months passed. By spring, workers under Mark's direction had replanted the slope, not with ornamental shrubs, but with native oak and juniper. Deep-rooted species meant to hold the earth like a living net. The hill slowly healed. At the first community meeting under the new board, Arlo approached the microphone. "Before we talk budgets," he said, "I think we owe one man an apology." Every head turned to Mark, sitting quietly at the back. Applause began, hesitant, then full, then standing. Mark nodded once. "We all made mistakes. Let's just make sure the next roots we cut are weeds." By summer, the wildflowers had returned. The hill glowed gold at sunset again, the way it looked before the chainsaws. Mark built a small wooden bench at the edge of his yard facing the valley. A sign beside it read, "In memory of the trees that held the hill." He still made videos, but now they were quieter. Practical guides about property law, soil management, and HOA reform. His channel grew beyond the neighborhood. People called him the Root Man, and his closing line became legendary across HOA forums. "When they take what holds you up, make sure you hold on to the truth. Because roots, like justice, grow back stronger." The camera panned out one last time. Sunlight pouring over the restored hill, the new oak swaying gently, and Mark sitting still, a silhouette against the horizon, proof that you can't bury what's meant to stand.